Hannah Arendt and the Banality of Digital Evil in 1963. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, simply doing what he was told without challenging authority. Arendt stressed that Eichmann did not seem like an evil person. He was just an unimaginative follower who failed to think about consequences. This idea that everyday people can perpetrate great harm through thoughtlessness or obedience is hauntingly relevant in the age of social media today. Anyone with a phone or computer can inadvertently become part of an online mob, contributing to real-world damage. In this essay, we explore how Arendt's insight illuminates modern digital phenomena, examine recent case studies of online outrage, Zuboff, Mill, and finally propose ways to promote responsibility and reflection in our online lives. The banality of evil in online culture. Arendt's key observation that ordinary people may commit atrocities through unquestioning compliance invites us to look at digital outrage and trolling in a new light. The mechanics of social media and the behaviors they produce can feel eerily bureaucratic. For example, one commentator draws a parallel between Eichmann's indifference and the detachment of tech. He notes that when Facebook and YouTube pursued growth without regard for the human cost from ethnic violence abroad to deep polarization at home, a refusal to think critically or feel genuine responsibility underlay the harm. Similarly, authors worried that algorithms and AI are cultivating a new kind of obedience, enabling the banality of evil through unquestioning mind, and algorithms that are designed to modify and manipulate behavior. In short, as we move through the digital world, we may become Eichmann-like in our banality, users guided by engineered prompts and herd mentality, sharing or condemning without reflection. An illustrative metaphor is Marshall McLuhan's famous warning: we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. While Eichmann shaped Nazi systems from within, the modern user is shaped by digital systems from without. Every like, retweet, or outrage-laden comment can reinforce a cycle engineered by platforms to keep us scrolling and reacting. Fittingly, Arendt's phrase applies not just to the architect, but to the society that allows evil to become routine on social media. Ordinary people, students, parents, co-workers, can become enablers of cruelty simply by echoing outrage or mob judgments without thinking. Outrage, trolling, and the banality of participation. Perhaps the most vivid evidence of digital banality is the online outrage mob. A now famous example shows how an offhand tweet can spark global fury. In 2013, PR executive Justine Sacco boarded a flight to Africa and posted unknowingly a cruel joke going to Africa. Hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding. I'm white. Initially the tweet went nowhere among Sacco's few followers, but hours later, after touching down, Sacco opened her phone and found herself Twitter's. The hashtag, "Has Justin Lander died?" alone was so popular that news outlets reported it before her plane even landed. Within a day, she had lost her job and been publicly shamed on a global scale. As journalist John Ronson later observed, most of the crowd chose to willfully misunderstand Sacco's intent, preferring a simple narrative of a racist villain and justified heroes, an ordinary mistake amplified by a faceless crowd. Importantly, many participants were not personal enemies of Sacco. They were strangers caught up in a collective moment. They retweeted and derided her with righteous fervor, often believing themselves to be doing the right thing by exposing racism. This pattern recurs in other instances in the MeToo era. Collective outrage toppled many abusers, but it also provoked a powerful backlash. By late 2023, a counter-movement had emerged. Media figures like Candace Owens and Joe Rogan publicly defended figures. As Vox reported, their advocacy was not isolated, but part of a larger anti-MeToo, anti-feminist backlash, shifting cultural sentiment online. This meant that some internet communities began accusing survivors of exaggeration or targeting only high-profile men. Commentators noted that, at a certain point, the days when America was transfixed by accusation after accusation are long over, replaced by skeptics who feel offended by what they see as unfair trials by Twitter. In effect, a new mob mentality formed against the original movement, This shows how easily digital outrage can invert. The same mechanisms that punish can be turned to defend or attack, depending on which group sees itself as a righteous crusader, even celebrities. The director James Gunn provides a striking case in 2018. Trolls dug up old tweets of his joking about taboo subjects like rape and pedophilia. Disney's response was swift. Its chairman called the jokes indefensible and announced, "We have severed our business relationship." Gunn was fired from the hit Guardians of the Galaxy franchise overnight, a move cheered by many online. Gunn immediately apologized. "I have regretted those jokes for many years," he said, promising to accept the consequences. The public reaction was split. Some fans lamented what they saw as overreaction. One Comic-Con attendee commented, "Everyone deserves a second chance." "It's kind of crazy, our culture today. Firing people right away." Others applauded the punishment. 8 months later, amid its own reflection, Disney quietly reversed course and rehired Gunn after discussions and his contrition. The reversal surprised some observers. As The Atlantic pointed out, Gunn's situation highlights how difficult it can be to determine when a so-called joke is offensive or harmful enough to warrant serious professional consequences. Intended as shock jock radio, the Gunn saga underscores the cycle of outrage and redemption. A normal person, or in this case, a creative professional with a sense of humor, is swept up by criticism. But since the backlash involved many gray areas, it also shows how internet justice can lack consistency and due process. In late 2021, she was outed for a history of cruel tweets. Fans and fellow celebrities dug up messages. Brands quickly distanced themselves. Bloomingdale's and Target stopped selling her merchandise, and Macy's paused her deals. The backlash was harsh, and public. Teigen issued a dramatic apology. "Not a lot of people are lucky enough to be held accountable for all their past bullshit in front of the entire world." Her fall was widely noted as ironic, given her prior role as someone who often championed social causes. For us, it demonstrates how even persons who view themselves as liberal or good can reveal a nasty side when online, and how quickly the internet crowd can swing from liking someone to condemning them. In Teigen's case, the mob was motivated by past bullying, a morally clearer target than a bad joke. But still, we see the same banality process ordinary posts, especially from a public figure. Teigen's story also shows some nuance. Unlike Sacco, she had offered an apology and seemed remorseful, yet the fury did not immediately abate. This suggests that once a crowd forms, it often feels self-righteous and seeks to reinforce its own identity by harshly punishing perceived wrongs, regardless of the subtleties of each case. Across all these episodes, digital crowds form rapidly, aided by platform mechanics and network sharing algorithms. As journalists have pointed out, deliberately push provocative or agitating content to users, often including misinformation or polarizing material, because more agitated users spend more time on social media and see more ads. In other words, every one of us is constantly nudged toward outrage. Meanwhile, people in an online outrage mob seldom see themselves as villain. They typically believe they're correcting a wrong. John Ronson notes that people in these Twitter mobs can even pat themselves on the back as they join a virtuous crusade. Yet this is precisely the banality Arendt warned of. Participants feel righteous. People tend to reserve judgment too little and follow the crowd too easily, often missing context or nuance. Indeed, Ronson reports that those swept into social media crusades are often surprised later at how zealous they became, regretfully admitting they didn't do enough reading and thinking before joining the mob. These case studies teach us that online evil is often banal, ordinary citizens. The crowd magnifies individual acts of scorn or stupidity into something frightening. An offhand tweet by a single person can ripple out to destroy a career, and the underlying causes are systemic. Social media rewards immediacy and emotion over reflection, creating echo chambers. In this sense, the banality of digital evil lies not in some mastermind, but in our collective unthinking behavior, aided by platforms designed to exploit philosophical perspectives on digital power to deepen our understanding. It helps to look at other thinkers, while Arendt highlighted thoughtless compliance. Shoshana Zuboff critiqued how tech companies harness personal data, and John Stuart Mill gave us a classic standard for judging when speech should be free or restricted. Each offers insight into how digital society can trap us in mindless pattern or justify punishment, the virtual panopticon. Surveillance and power. Foucault's notion of the panopticon is instructive. He described a prison design with a central watchtower where inmates must behave as if always observed. They internalize disciplined social media, creates a virtual panopticon where our posts and profiles are visible to peers, authorities. In this space, there are no physical guards. By everyone else, as one analysis puts it, we are both guards and prisoners. Every status update, like or share, feels like a performance. Before a crowd, we police ourselves to fit norms. This constant visibility breeds conformity. Individuals may join an outrage mob, partly because they sense many others are watching and expect them to conform. The same technology that connects us also creates subtle pressure when we know our friends or followers. Foucault warns that such total visibility tends to normalize behavior in the digital era. This means people habituate to outrage as normal discourse. A post might go viral if it's extreme, so we see more extremes. The panopticon effect here also ties back. Users become cogs in a system, often unaware of how their actions contribute to harm. We might judge someone harshly in a tweet simply because we feel watched by others ourselves. In a sense, the fear of being seen as unwoke or unsupportive can compel us to take part in punitive online rituals. Foucault's insight shows how power flows laterally through our networks. Instead of a single tyrant, the platform architecture and our peer group serve as collective disciplinarians, a subtle power that can render people self-policing and thoughtless participants in digital evil. Surveillance capitalism and behavioral manipulation. Shoshana Zuboff's concept of surveillance capitalism takes this further. She shows that tech giants don't merely watch us, they actively shape us in their drive for profit. These companies sell certainty to advertisers. As Zuboff puts it, they know the best way to make predictions come true is to tune and herd and shape and push us in the direction that creates the highest probability of their business success. Platforms constantly tweak their feeds to push us toward content that keeps us hooked. Clickbait, sensational news. A dispassionate, reflective mind is bad for business. Algorithms that deliberately provoke extreme emotional reactions, confrontational or conspiratorial content, gets a boost, regardless of truth, because it enrages us into staying online longer. Zuboff warns this is an assault on autonomy. There's no way to dress this up as anything but behavioral modification. We become Pavlovian users, responding reflexively to alerts and outrage cues. Crucially, she emphasizes that this is a choice made by business. The sites encourage our worst instincts because it maximizes profit. This aligns with Arendt's lesson. Eichmann and his peers were also part of a system built to fulfill specific goals. To stay connected, amused, or outraged is steered by corporate interests. The result is a kind of collective passivity. Most users do not maliciously set out to harass others. Zuboff's analysis also highlights the data dimension of digital evil. Every post, like, and share is tracked to better manipulate us next time. This means our worst impulses and our fears of others' opinions are catalogued and exploited. For example, this feedback loop can radicalize ordinary minds. They are turbocharged by a profit machine that values their anger in this view. They professionalize Eichmann's banality, turning user apathy and groupthink into a business model. Liberty, harm, and free speech. Mill's perspective, in contrast to Foucault and Zuboff's structural critiques. John Stuart Mill offers a more individualistic test. The harm principle. Mill argued in On Liberty that people should be free to think and say anything unless it harms others. As he famously put it, the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community is to prevent harm to others. Applied to digital outrage, this suggests a clear question. When is shutting someone down online preventing real harm? And when is it simply punishing speech we dislike? Mill defended free expression vigorously, noting that even harshest and most disagreeable ideas should be heard to preserve truth and individual growth. He warned that silencing someone usually silences truth as well. In fact, he wrote that liberty of speech is practically inseparable from liberty of thought itself. This principle implies caution about cancelling people for offensive jokes or opinions. If the speech is not directly causing harm, such as incitement to violence, then Mill would argue it. Sacco's joke was racist and hurtful, but did it physically harm anyone by Mill's yardstick? It probably did not. It was a stupid, mean tweet, not a call to violence. Gunn's tweets were repugnant, but they were jokes, not crime. Teigen's bullying of a teenager was vindictive and arguably could cause real emotional harm, which complicates Mill's test. And during MeToo debates, a tweet accusing someone of wrongdoing could deeply wound reputations. Again, a grey zone. Mill would likely say that only speech causing direct, certain harm, like credible threats, merits censorship. Indeed, in the Sacco case, many legal scholars and free speech advocates argued that what Twitter did was not speech regulation in the classic sense. The mob had no legal power over Sacco, but their social power was huge. Mill might say this private condemnation is not government force. However, Mill also acknowledged that society uses social pressure to enforce norms. He famously said, "Society has the right to express its moral condemnation and ostracize deviant behavior, but only up to preventing direct harm." This is a tension in practice. Online mobs often operate like social government. Mill's insight would caution us if a collective punishment, job loss, threat. At the very least, Mill would urge that any restriction of speech or shaming be justified by a compelling case of harm, one that goes beyond people. In sum, Mill's philosophy reminds us to guard free expression and tolerate offensive speech. She valued plurality of opinion and distrusted any pressure to conform. Thus, from a Mill-Arendt standpoint, online mobs can be dangerous. Even if well-intentioned, they risk trampling on the open dialogue. Mill championed balancing this with Zuboff's and Foucault's warnings. We need both structural reforms to curb manipulative design and a cultural shift to uphold thoughtful liberty solutions. Ethical design, responsibility, and literacy after surveying the problem. If banality is enabled by technology and group behavior, our remedies must address both. There are no quick fixes. Ethical design of platforms, corporate and civic duty, and education in digital literacy, ethical platform design, slowing virality. One promising idea is to redesign social media itself to encourage reflection. Instead of endless, frictionless sharing, platforms could insert salubrious friction into the user experience. For example, a simple delay before posting or retweeting a trending item could give users a moment to reconsider item. Much like a speed bump on a highway forces drivers to slow down. Ellen Goodman, a media scholar, she suggests platforms add new steps or confirmations that slow the pull of low-fidelity information in practice. After clicking share, the app asks, "Are you sure you want to share this now?" or shows a reminder of sharing guidelines before a tweet goes live. There are precedents. WhatsApp tested a prompt on forwarded messages. Careful. This message was forwarded many times to warn users. Facebook and Google have experimented with fact-check warnings or quizzes before you post. Research supports this approach. A recent study found that simply making people think about accuracy dramatically reduces sharing of false content. In one experiment, users were occasionally nudged to rate the accuracy of an unrelated headline. Afterward, they shared significantly less fake news. This implies small intervention, like pop-up messages asking how trustworthy is this, could improve news quality on our feeds. More broadly, ethical design means reorienting platforms away from maximum engagement and toward user well-being design. Ethicist Tristan Harris famously compared social media to tobacco companies, noting every time you open an app, there are 1,000 engineers behind it trying to keep you using it. As if to prove his point, social media engineers bake addiction into interfaces. To counter this, platforms could remove or hide like buttons and viral count metrics. They could also tweak algorithms to diversify content rather than amplify controversy, for instance. Another concrete measure is to label or slow the spread of content that flirts with hate or harassment. Imagine if Twitter required a user to add a comment when retweeting a tweet below a civility threshold, or if Facebook allowed users to anonymously flag posts that feel harassing, triggering a pause on that post's amplification. These are creative ideas under discussion, None of them make sharing impossible, but they force a moment of choice. In Arendtian terms, they nudge us out of thoughtlessness by making us notice that we're contributing to something, even a pop-up. Are you sure? Insert that crucial pause, Arendt says, is needed to disrupt the ignorant. Corporate and civic responsibility design changes must be coupled with corporate responsibility. Today's platforms operate largely as unregulated gatekeepers. An analysis of social media ethics calls this a systemic crisis. Disinformation about vaccines or elections, hate campaigns, and even incitements to violence. Many argue companies have a moral duty to moderate content more effectively. For years, businesses have been challenged to balance free expression with harm prevention. But critics say they have struggled with this task. The result is patchwork policies. Some advocate for stronger regulations. In the US, legal scholars note that Section 230, indeed, Section 230, actually encourages companies to moderate by granting immunity when they act in good faith. Today, there are calls to reinterpret or repeal parts of it, to force companies to bear consequences if they allow rampant abuse. One commentator bluntly puts it, it's time for the federal government either to insist that social media companies do more, or to remove the protections from liability that either compel platforms. This would be a radical step, but it reflects the scale of harm alongside legal changes. Some ethicists suggest tech firms should treat content moderation like any other duty, with transparency, oversight, and public interest in mind. For example, companies could publish regular reports on harassment rates, shadow ban incidents. Critics say this remains ad hoc, but more is needed. Public pressure has already shown it can drive change. When Justine Sacco's firing became globally infamous, similarly, after Chrissy Teigen's scandal, retailers felt compelled to cut her products. This market accountability shows that corporate support, or lack thereof, matters. If enough consumers demand safer platforms, companies may have no choice but to embed ethics into their business model. Citizens, journalists, educators, and civil society must become allies in resisting mob mentality. One needed shift is toward enforcing civic norms. Norms like giving the benefit of the doubt and fact-checking before reacting. Educators and experts routinely advise practices that sound like common sense. For instance, DHS's Media Literacy Guide urges us think before you share. Damaging disinformation spreads quickly via shared posts. Emotional topics are often used to manipulate readers into sharing without thinking. In other words, catch yourself before retweeting a provocative claim. Other tips include verifying sources. These steps: check author, inspect URL, watch for sensational language, are taught in digital literacy programs around the world. In practice, some schools already integrate digital citizenship curricular lessons on how to spot fake news. Companies and NGOs can help by funding such programs. Public campaigns, much like anti-smoking ads, could raise awareness of outrage addiction and promote empathy. Even tech-savvy users can engage in bystander intervention online. When one sees harassment, one can speak up or report it, rather than passively liking items. This echoes the cultural advice. Ronson summarizes reserved judgment. These aren't legal rules, but cultural ones. If society can instill in everyone a moment's pause and curiosity, is there more to this story? We might blunt the crowd's reflex to punish. To support healthy public discourse, we might also establish civic institutions of the digital sphere. Imagine something like a social media ombudsman or publicly visible trust badges. We already have fact-checking websites and crowdsourced truth projects. These could be expanded. Communities online and offline can endorse mutual commitments. Egon, a platform. Realistically, not everyone will comply, but even some peer pressure can curb the more extreme mobs. Finally, governments and civil society must insist on corporate accountability laws like those passed in the EU. The Digital Services Act requires platforms to take more responsibility for hate speech and disinformation. Similar efforts are brewing elsewhere. If done wisely, regulations can push companies toward transparency, such as explaining why certain posts went viral and content review. This doesn't solve individual behavior by itself, but it changes the environment so that the banality of digital evil is less easy to produce. Summary of key solutions. design ethically builds speed bumps into sharing. Delays pop-ups, accuracy prompts for example, requiring confirmation before a potentially inflammatory post goes live, or reminding users to think about accuracy has been shown to reduce misinformation sharing. Consider removing instantaneous like counters or providing mental health usage stats. Corporate responsibility. Hold platforms accountable. Treat moderation as a public health issue. Tech firms can adopt clear, transparent policies on hate and harassment, and governments can enforce them. Some suggest re-examining legal shields. Promote digital literacy. Teach everyone to be skeptical online. Simple rules from DHS. Check sources, look for credible authors, and think before you share. Can be incorporated into school curricula and public media. Encourage norms of charity. Reserve judgment and give others the benefit of the doubt whenever possible. Civic engagement. Empower users to intervene constructively. Crowdsource fact checks. Support independent journalism, and create community guidelines that reward thoughtful dialogue. Online communities might self-police more, flagging harassment and validating corrections. Shift the narrative from punishment to rehabilitation. Like the fan who pleaded for a second chance for James Gunn, we can recognize that people can change. Instead of immediate rage, online culture can value genuine apology and dialogue, much like real societies do. Each of these approaches targets a part of the problem together. They edge us toward a healthier ecosystem, one where posting takes a moment of thought, where companies don't flourish on our anger, and where citizens know how to navigate the deluge of information. Conclusion. Hannah Arendt's insight warns us that great evil often arises from small, everyday failures of thought in the digital era. Those failures can play out at internet scale. We see it when a careless tweet becomes a viral catastrophe, or when a righteous hashtag escalates into a viral lynch mob. Yet the people who click share or retweet, they're like Eichmann, normal and often oblivious to the consequences of their routines. By examining recent case studies, well-meaning or at least well-intentioned individuals doing something harmful simply because it is easy and feels right in the moment, Arendt's philosophy that individuals must retain their capacity for judgment has never been more relevant. If social media lives to amplify the herd, we must cultivate countervailing forces of reason, philosophers like Foucault and Zuboff, so we cannot rely on mass behavior to correct itself. Mill reminds us we must cherish free thought, even unpopular speech, lest we descend into a different tyranny of social conformity. The good news is, platforms can change or be compelled to change their design and policies. Society can educate and empower citizens. Human nature and technology will always create challenges, but it can break the spell of banality. If we slow down, reflect, and remember that there are real people behind every profile, we may find that the next time outrage stirs, the tide of banality does not carry us all away in the end. Safeguarding our digital public square requires thoughtful participation, just as Arendt insisted. By arming ourselves with critical thinking and demanding better design, we honor the spirit of freedom and responsibility in the internet age. If ordinary people pause, if companies resist the siren call pure virality, and if each user learns to discern before joining a digital crusade, we can make social media less a vehicle for banal evil and more a tool for genuine connection and understanding.